See ships in the distance.
Okay. Do you understand angular resolution?
I may understand it.
Okay, so let's say it was just you and me here, and I was to walk a mile away from you. Would I look as tall as I do now, or would I have shrunk?
No, you'd just be far away. You wouldn't have shrunk.
I don't get, well, physically I won't have shrunk, but you know, if we look at the big boats out there, they're fairly small, but as they come closer to us, like the steam train, it gets larger and larger. Would you accept that?
Yeah.
So in reverse, the further it goes away, the smaller it becomes.
Yes,
so no matter how large,
from our eye, but if you had a magnifying glass,
yeah, how
or
powerful,
a super high powered telescope, or a pair of binoculars, that size,
yep,
you will be able to see a ship to the end of the world. You'll be able to see the edge of the world.
All right. Do you know that what we're standing in now is atmosphere? Yes? And
Yes.
that atmosphere has moisture in it. Are you aware of that? Okay, so over any distance we start to lose the clarity of things because of the
atmosphere. Point of view,
atmosphere.
instead of looking at the stars, they twinkle. We're looking at them through our atmosphere.
Mm-hmm.
But you put a telescope into space, you get a very different. You've got the Hubble,
Okay.
you've got the James
All right.
Webb telescope that's going to be launched next year.
Yeah.
These are blowing apart
Okay.
preconceptions we had. Now, I agree. Everything is a mystery until we know how to solve it.
Well, yeah, the problem is that if we're being misled, so we could take that powerful telescope that you were just mentioning, and the ship that people tell us has gone over the curve of the horizon, we can bring that ship fully right back into view. And we can do that for about an hour, maybe longer, as that ship gets eventually smaller away and sinks into the horizon. But the lie that we're told, or the truth that ballers like to tell us is that 3 miles, 4 miles, that's about as far, and then the ship's going to go over the horizon. Well, if I can see it at 20 miles away, that belies that absolutely, right?
That's you can see with your eye. Who are you talking about?
No, I'm using what you are saying, that we should be able to see things over large distances. We know that they get smaller as the further they go away, right? So eventually any object is going to get too small for us to perceive, even with a very powerful telescope. But that doesn't allow for the amount of occlusion in the atmosphere. So on a rainy day, we know we won't see more than a mile. On a clear day, we might see 10 miles. Over a dry desert, you might see even further. You go up higher, of course you see further. These are the variations that can come into play. But eventually things go away so far, and they go so far into the mist or the water of our atmosphere that we know we can't see them. The furthest we've been able to see is with an infrared device. And from cruising altitude on a plane, a guy can see mountains at 500 miles from his position. This has been recorded and it is verified on Google Maps or whatever. So if we can see things at 500 miles over what seems to be level water, when eventually is this stuff going to curve? But we acknowledge you can't see. I mean, it's one of those sort of disinfo memes that's been put out there to say, oh, well then, why can't I see, I'm standing here in Portugal, why can't I see America? Well, yeah, I mean, even if it was the clearest of clear days and you could see 100 miles or 200 miles, things at that distance are minuscule. Yes, you need a powerful telescope, and then as far as our powerful telescopes over ground, we don't see things more than a few hundred miles away. The world record photo, by the way, 270 miles, and the object, the island in the shot in the 270 miles should be 3 miles below the curvature of the Earth, according to the maths that we're given by mainstream science.
Well, what about then? How come nobody's ever been to the edge then?
Well, I mean, that's again one of those questions that's put into our minds. I mean, we've never seen...
I've travelled the world. I've been around the world, and I've travelled east to west and west to east. Mm-hmm. I'll always come back to the same point.
Yes, and of course you can do that if you look at the typical flat Earth depiction of how the Earth might work. Like I say to people, think about like an orange with all its segments, but that orange is cut through the center. And our compass always points towards the core or the center of the orange. So we can travel around something like that, no problem at all. But you know what we've never done? No Richard Branson, no multi-billionaire has never done. He's never taken his money and flown a plane or any craft underneath the globe. We've never gone in at 180 and come out at 0, or 270 and come out at 90. We've never achieved that, or we can't do that. We only go in, we skim what seems to be a continental shelf, and we come back out again. In the 1950s, they came up with this Antarctic Treaty, which denies us, you and me, no matter how wealthy we are, from going to do whatever we want down there. Yeah, and I mean, in a world that's full of greed by the Exxon and Mobil and Shell and so on, that they aren't out there, making a coin, because there's a very famous American admiral by the name of Richard Byrd, goes out there in the 1950s 3 times on massive expeditions and comes back and says, I found land bigger than America, and it's so full of resources it'll keep the world going for many years, that kind of thing. And yet they shut it down and say, oh, we're protecting the penguins. That doesn't match with a world that's fracking. and doing all sorts of things like burning forests and deforestation
I
and so
agree.
on.
I mean, that model is redundant now. The fossil fuel model is redundant. It's killing the planet.
So this issue of why haven't we gone underneath when we can go out to the moon 50 years ago, but we don't have craft that can kind of just fly 6 hours or 3 hours, 4 hours, whatever it takes to get that travel from 0 to 180 or vice versa, crisscross from South Africa to Australia down that way. No, we don't do it. And we can make excuses for why we don't do it, of course, and I feel that's where you want to go. But the truth is that these are inconsistencies with the model that when you start to unpick the moon landings in fine detail, in 4K detail, we can see that they faked those. And when we look at the ISS, we can see that they are doing these spacewalks in a swimming pool.
Here's a question for you. Moon landings 50 years ago.
Yeah.
Height of the Cold War.
Okay. Theoretical war, but yeah, go on.
Well, we've got 20,000 nuclear missiles pointing at each other, you know.
So they say.
Yeah. Well,
so if we believed all the propaganda, yes.
Well, you have.
Yes.
Well,
remember when I say that when I say that there is a controlling hand that sits above all the governments, that none of them actually operate independently. There's no Putin is like the man and Donald Trump is the man. They are licensed operators, and the license comes from some higher command. So the idea that any of the information that you and I have been given by the BBC or whatever your favorite trusted, as I trusted all these institutions, any of that information has the potential to be toxic. And if you and I can't demonstrate this for ourselves, then I start to question it. And so, yes, fossil fuels, yes, nuclear bombs and so on, these things are potentially part of the deception, and it's all part of a great
What about then
game.
all the atmospheric tests that they've done in nuclear weapons, you know, which is all documented, all recorded, all declassified now as well? We know we have these weapons.
Well, I would say that when I was brought up, I was told that the atomic bomb was such a frightful weapon that if they ever detonated one in your place, you'd never be able to live there for like 10,000 years. You know, the half-life of would be so. Yeah. It would be like that. Well, here's a surprise. I only learned this a few years ago, but Hiroshima and Nagasaki were flattened, right? Mm-hmm. But so too was Tokyo, and the photos of those three cities look identical, and all three of those cities were rebuilt immediately in the aftermath of the war. And I read National Geographic things showing birth defects from these places and so on, but in truth they are fantastic cities, and if there was such a fallout problem just years later, why would people even consider
Well, they had very small yields as well, and they were air bursts, so they don't get as much fallout from the ground as a ground burst does.
Okay, I mean this is what I get a lot is people just offer their interpretation that's been given to them of why that's an inconsistency with what you and I are taught.
People have spent their lives works in universities and institutions around the world. Yeah. Are they all part of this conspiracy?
No,
scientists?
No, like you don't believe in religion. You don't, I'm sure, believe that the priests of those religions are lying. They truly believe what the version.
To me, religion is like living in North Korea. It's mass brainwashing.
Okay,
it's controlled.
okay.
You get them at a small age, but you get them at a small age,
and once you've got them, they will go on and teach that to their children, right?
Yes.
Right. How do we know?
How many times has a scientific question or a scientific answer after 20 years, they all go back? Oh no, sorry, we made a mistake. It was God that did it. You know, so we've learned that God isn't there, right? So we look at different ways. To me, this is, I've seen it online, I've listened to the arguments. I think it's a bit bonkers.
Have you actually applied any of the stuff, like done any experimentation for yourself?
Yeah, no, I've looked at the experiments.
Because the thing about the thing
right?
is, like the arguments that religious people don't want to hear that you might make as an atheist are the same as the arguments that the believers in gravity
I'll never
won't
be able to change their mind.
So for us to go and do a test over a short body of water, let's just say 3 miles, which is meant to have as much curvature as the height of you and I. If you and I were to be able to go and stand at the beach, at the water's edge, 3 miles from each other and still see each other, we'd immediately know that there was something wrong with the formula that we've been given to say this is a 24,000 mile ball that we live on, right? Immediately. And now you and I can do that today, but most people, they don't want to take the plunge, because when you start to unpick your religious belief, this is what it is, it's like, no, I don't want to go there. So when you pick it out of Muslims, bits about his belief, or a Christian, bits about their belief, they don't want to go there.
Yeah.
And this is, I'm afraid, what I now say, because I was, as I say, an atheist, I say was my belief system that there could be no other thing. I will say that I got a shortcut to the truth, and that was through ayahuasca. through DMT, the dimethyltryptamine. You know the third eye, the pineal gland?
I've heard of it.
It excretes DMT, but you can actually overload the DMT through either going in a dark room for a week or doing ayahuasca or smoking DMT. And I did that 4 years ago, and I was 46, 47 at the time, and in 5-6 minutes of the DMT trip, I got so much information given to me that I came back a believer in a higher power. Just like that, I came back and said, oh my God, it's true. There is something much higher than this, and I'm connected to it. We're all connected to it. It's a place of intense, total love. And we come from it and we return to it. But I think
And that then sort of says that we're special.
Yeah,
as a single species,
which atheism and scientism and
planet.
evolution never wants us to know is that yes, we are special.
One species.
Well, we are
all the 10 million species. One species.
Yes.
We're special.
Yes.
But yet our DNA is 98% chimpanzee. Our genome has been cracked. We can trace everything back to single-cell organisms.
Well,
we now know
I mean,
history.
again, you're putting a lot of faith in institutions and machines that you and I can't test for ourselves.
Thousands of scientists who have devoted their life to finding out these problems. They're all wrong, or they're all a conspiracy.
No, I mean, well, like for us on the flat Earth, we say, of course, satellites aren't puncturing through some invisible barrier between our high-pressure system and a vacuum. You know, thermodynamics requires for there to be a containment of any sort of pressure system, particularly against a vacuum. So we don't believe that there's anything getting out of this system. So the satellites that we use in the world today are being strung up on helium or sort of high altitude balloons, and they can stay up there for 3 to 6 months. They're on record. The system is on record saying this is how we do these types of satellites. But we think all satellites are being done in exactly the same way. Does that mean that satellite engineers are lying to people, or the guy who fits the satellite to your home when he thinks he's pointing it at some satellite in the sky rather than the ground tower that's at about the same angle that he's pointing it? He doesn't know that he's doing that. He's been mistaught on purpose, and even the people who do the teaching, the professors, they don't have to be in on it.
What would be the benefit then of this big conspiracy?
To control the human story, to control the trajectory. Some say to create the Sodom and Gomorrah hell that they talk about in biblical terms, to create that environment for us to come and have some sort of challenging experience, because there's no real death. Then this life is like a brief...
Kind of like a final conflict kind of thing you're talking about, or like a final showdown.
Maybe. I mean, I don't know about final. You know, obviously, I think that what I got on the DMT was that I was an internal being. So this is an eternal story. It's been going eternally.
I'm a little bit ignorant on the DMT. I'm not too sure about that. I'm quite interested.
That's all right. You please look into it. There's a documentary called DMT, the Spirit Molecule. It's on YouTube, and it includes a doctor's proper medical study of it, trial of it in the 1990s in America. He got permission. Very surprisingly, got permission.
DMT, is that a substance? Is it a
dimethyltryptamine? Well, it's a chemical.
All drugs are chemicals.
Yeah, well, I don't know about that, but I mean,
everything's a chemical.
Well,
That's
a chemical. Yes, it's a chemical that the body creates. So it's a chemical of the body. All living creatures or all living things give off DMT or dimethyltryptamine.
All living things.
Yeah, and in America, yes, and in America, South America, they've got this ayahuasca drink, which is extracting from a very high potency plant. The Earth is flat, my friends. We can't prove that the Earth is a ball. We could talk all day. What's your name?
My name is Bernard.
Bernard, nice to meet you, Bernard.
Ireland.
Well, if you've got any more questions, Bernard, but I do want to try and catch a few more faces
Of course,
for the footage.
Yeah.
La Terra è plana.
Just a quick question. How's your response been?
Better this year than last. You know, we're getting more people who've heard about it, so they have, people have genuine questions. Some just been watching the debunking videos and they're full of ridicule, and that's all they wanted. They preloaded. Oh wow, a flat earther! Let me give you all the kind of debunk arguments that I've been having on Facebook or I've been having online.
It's similar to the religion. I could never convince you otherwise. As the same, I could never convince a Muslim that Muhammad didn't.
Yeah, but I can prove that water's level.
Yeah.
I can prove that for a fact.
I can prove to you otherwise, and I've seen experiments. You get two boats 10 miles apart on a lake.
Yeah.
You fire a laser at one,
Yeah.
it's not going to hit the same point.
Well, I know the National Geographic did a thing like that, but they were trying to fool people really, because a laser does scatter, but the American military have a weapon called the railgun.
Yeah, I know.
You've heard of the railgun?
Yeah.
Do you know how it
Fires
works?
projectiles, yeah.
Yes. And how far?
Oh,
you know?
it's traveling.
It's insane.
7 times the speed of sound or something.
Something like that, or Mark 15 actually, as it leaves the projectile or the weapon, and it can travel for 80 to 100 miles, and they use that to shoot at another ship 80 to 100 miles away, and it's a line of sight direct shot. How is that, using your example, how do you square that when I'm going 10 times further, and they say the curvature should be 6,000 feet by 10 to 100 miles?
Oh, they might have a slight trajectory on it.
Now you're making excuses, Bernard. You're continuing to make excuses.
Listen, best of luck.
Thanks, buddy. Hey, guys.
How's it going?
Good, how are you?
Yeah,
I'm
good.
Dave.
Dave.
Yeah.
That's me,
What's
Dave.
your name?
George.
Hey, George. I'm just filming this for my YouTube channel.
How is it?
Oh, awesome.
I'm Will.
You guys from England?
Yeah.
All right.
Where are
On
you
holiday or? On holiday? Or you working?
No, I live here.
Oh, awesome.
I'm
well,
just visiting. I'm just
all right.
for a week or so.
All right. Well, I'm raised in South Africa, but I've been living in London for 25 years,
right.
and now I'm on the road for a little while, just going around Europe, telling people about the deception of the nature of the world we live in.
All right.
Have you heard of the flat Earth now?
I
by
have, yeah,
now?
I've heard of the theory, yeah, I've done a little bit of research
You
here
have?
and there, yeah,
Awesome.
yeah. But, you know, not in too much detail. I'm not sure where I sit on it, to be
Okay.
fair, yeah.
Took me a few months actually, and when I started looking at it in 2015, there was very few people around that I could relate to, that I could talk to about this. You know, certainly no one in person, but online. So but now today, you know, there are unfortunately mostly debunked videos when you go and look at this on YouTube, but there's a lot of people and there's a growing community. In fact, today there's a convention going off in Dallas in America, where there's some 800 people got together for, you know, a little bit of a shindig and talk about things. But for me anyway, you know, here's a guy with a NASA shirt, that's going to be interesting. For me anyway, 4 years into looking at this, there's no proof that we live on a spinning globe. There's no science that we can do really, that you and I can test for ourselves, which is the scientific method, to be able to test it and repeat it. We can't do any experiment that show that the Earth is spinning. Yes, we see movement above us, but that doesn't mean we're moving. We don't feel any movement. We don't sense that we're going upside down or anything like that. Everything stays super stable on our world. We're given excuses why we don't feel it, but those excuses can be easily unpicked. And I've had plenty of conversations with people in the streets, an opportunity to unpick some of that stuff. So the other thing, of course, for me was the game changer for me was the curvature formula. That curvature formula, no matter whose version you use, will always give you meters and meters of curvature just a few miles ahead of you. And we know that really is hard to kind of see or measure. It's impossible to measure. We may think we see it, but when you consider the natural physics of water, then this idea that it's going to go down, eventually go down until it's sideways and then upside down, that doesn't really work in our version of reality, you know, because physics of water must be contained. Water must be contained, otherwise it'll fall off. It'll fall off the table, it'll run down the hill until it gets to a pool or a puddle, and that's where it'll stop, until that puddle overflows. And so it keeps going until it gets to the ocean, and then we say there's one sea level, and therefore, you know, if you take a map and look at your height above sea level, for example, it's going to be the same sea level that's been used to calculate that, you know. And in England, it would be one sea level. There's not, there's an east coast level and there's a west coast level and so on. Everything is level with water. So then you start to go, okay, well, if this isn't possible, then what else do I need to start unpicking? And for me, it was the moon landings. My belief that they'd been to the moon and stuff had to be reevaluated. Great documentary called A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon. I recommend that to everyone. Go and check that out, because it's NASA's own footage of how they get around faking it.
Oh, really? Right.
For example, they never got the lunar lander to work on Earth. You know, the lunar lander, which was going to obviously do the difficult thing of going into this hostile environment and then landing safely, they never even got the chassis of the lunar lander to control itself on Earth, you know. The best I think Neil Armstrong did was about 30 seconds in the air, and he was never under control and had to eject before the thing crashed. And that footage, you know, if you see that, you're okay, so did they just trust that it was going to work when they got there fully loaded? When they couldn't get it to work unloaded? Then you look at other things like the footage of them inside the cupola, putting a sort of picture of the Earth into the window and making it look as though there was a Terminator line over that picture to say, look, this is us halfway between the moon and the Earth. you just go, wow. And then you see the interview of these 3 guys when they get back, right? Armstrong, imagine it's the 3 of us. We've just gone to the moon, first men to ever do that. How excited would we be? How happy would be, just think you've won the Formula 1 or the World Cup football or whatever. How full of it are you going to be at the press conference? Yeah, I did this and then this happened and then this happened. Not these 3 guys. They look like guilty criminals, fidgeting, nervous, shifty-eyed. Their answers don't really correlate. Important things like, could you see stars on your way back from the moon? One says yes, one says no. These are things that you go, guys, look at this. Then when you get to the moon, you go, bring out the video camera. We've got the dune buggy in the back, but let's make sure we've got room for the video camera so we can get up there and show the folks exactly how the Earth looks spinning in space. Why wouldn't they do that? They try and offer us a CGI thing now in 2015, but really the best thing is the real thing. And if all they'd done is taken a video camera up there along with their dune buggy and said, right, we're going to film for an hour while we're up here, just see the Earth lazily turning through 15 degrees, that would be killer evidence that they were up there and killer evidence that this rock could genuinely float on a vacuum of time and space or on a cushion of time and space. And these things don't make sense in reality. How does the Earth work? I don't know. I'm not answering you. I'm not saying I know how it works. This is not what Flat Earth is about. It's to say that we know the globe is a lie. We know that the globe is a complete deception. And why? Because it diminishes who we are. When you unpick what evolution and Big Bang and all these lucky strike aspects of us being here do to the psyche, you realize that this is about mind control. This is about diminishing and minimizing you from the very youngest age in a way that you can barely understand. And by the time you get to adulthood, you're accepting of the version of reality offered to us by the same people who told you you come from evolution. So I used to totally be into the BBC, Brian Cox, and that pretty Sarah Beat, not Sarah. So attractive lady, and I'd be totally into what they were saying and their theories. And science is now we've done an isotope reading, or we found a bone or a fragment of something has given us hope that this is the truth. And I was waiting for life on Mars or life on the moon to prove that we'd been there, or all these sorts of things. I was totally brought up with all of that, and now I know that was part of an ongoing system of indoctrination that is designed to keep us from never discovering the truth about who and what we really are. And the truth of who we are is something magnificent. But
What do you think we really are?
Well, I had a DMT. Did I mention that to you? DMT experience. Did I mention the DMT? No, I was talking to someone else.
You've done that. Psychedelics as well.
Okay. So for me, I'd done like acid and mushrooms in my when I was younger. But when I did the DMT 4 years ago, that's it. Atheist, believer in 5 minutes. That's it. At the age of 47. So I was hard boiled into my atheism. And 5 minutes on the DMT, and I came back going, my God, I'm part of something much greater.
Absolutely.
And when I was on the DMT, everything became electric. I couldn't see material people, or everything's energy, brother. And you've seen it. Yeah. So you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, absolutely.
For me, this was like, it really unpicked my atheism and my belief in science and evolution and all these things. I was like, bang, and gone in an instant. And then I found the flat earth thing, and I like, shit, the game is not only that they're just trying to hold something about the greater power, but the entirety of the world that we live in is a construct that's been designed around us to keep us in a sort of this mental prison of debt, servitude, of smallness, of insignificance, and so on, rather than actually being the fractal first cousin or first relation of the creator of this place. There is no separation ultimately. We might be at the bottom in this physical form, we might be at the bottom rung of the pyramid, and as you get up higher into the metaphysical layers, you rejoin back with your higher selves. Because when I was on the DMT, I felt like I was connected to a higher self, but that higher self wasn't necessarily the all, the creator. So
just another aspect of your consciousness that knows more than you.
Yeah.
For me, I've been connected there as well. I've had psychedelic experiences where I've been like, telepathically connected to elements of my own consciousness, even my own family's consciousness as well, residing in different planes of existence with just the most vast amount of knowledge about me, myself, or what issues and stuff that I have to solve, to kind of move forward in my own evolution.
Awesome.
Yeah, powerful.
Awesome. Now you've got to ask yourself the question: why doesn't the second thing I think I said is that why aren't all 16-year-olds, why aren't we all brought up with this information, this knowledge about the pineal gland, this knowledge about this connection? Because the connection is so real when you do it through the DMT. It's like, no, they must know it's there, the system, and they are obviously hiding, keeping us from those kinds of substances for the reason, they don't want us to ever learn this truth about who we are. That's the first sort of point of connection. We can say, gosh, there is a knowledge that we are something much more important, much more significant. And if we know this, we live a far more beautiful, rewarding, loving life, because we know what we're connected to, right?
Love being a big driving force.
And so the antithesis of love is hate, and is war, and is separation, and is anxiety, and is stress. And all they've done to us is create all these barriers in the mind, stresses that keep us from ever kind of lighting up. I say to people, I even though I'm not a believer in the religions, I say use the character of Christ as an example of who you might be. That the Christ of the light of the Creator resides within each one of us, but that light has been over generations has been dulled, damaged, and held back. So to a much greater extent, maybe for some less so. But once you know this, you go, how am I going to allow my light to be infused and to grow? Because that's really what I think we're meant to be, cycling back out of this dark hate into love,
war,
light.
Out of the war.
Yeah.
But the system.
What that did to the psyche, to the human subconscious mind.
Yeah.
How we kind of were brought up by our parents who were like stricken with war and poverty and scarcity and all these kind of things.
Exactly, and they wanted the system indoctrinate, absolutely, and they want to get clever at the system, and get us to willingly give away our energy to the system, and we end up making those sorts of choices for ourselves, because they'll put the sweets out in front of you and say, hey, have some of these. The price you might pay later on might be, it might be much more than simply say you eat too much bad food and you just become obese and maybe die 10 years earlier. But there might be something much more significant to the entire vibration of the energy of the system. And so I say to people, because you've seen it in electromagnetic form, I say that I think we're on some sort of electromagnetic system, or we're within some sort of electromagnetic system, and each of us are a microcosm of the macrocosm. And so if the earth is suffering, it's because the microcosms upon the earth are suffering.
Yep.
And so until we stop the suffering within ourselves, then the vibration we're going to put back into the system is going to be a darker, redder, hotter kind of vibration, rather than a cooler, more loving, balanced vibration. The divine masculine, divine feminine, all that plays into this. So that's why I think it matters to get out and tell people about this stuff, because until we stop playing in the system and being of the system's vibration, Earth is going to continue to suffer and get more and more sort of damaged. Does Earth have the greater power? Yes. Does it eventually maybe pull time on a very dark type of humanity, and then there's a reset? Some say, like the Noah flood type thinking. Some say that might be what happens. But for my vote, I would say I'm trying to get out there and help people realize that their vibration is key.
Yep.
And until you change what's within you and go within you, then we will never change the world.
So where do you think that fits within? If the Earth was flat, what do you think how that was intended to be? Because obviously, I'm just curious. Like, obviously, if there is a higher power, how do you think the Earth was intended to be? Was it round, flat?
I'd say if it's an electromagnetic torus field, then it's right. What they tell us, it's like an oblate spheroid. Well, I think that we might be in an electromagnetic oblate spheroid, like a lemon or an orange, but cut through the center, so that our magnetic north always points towards the center, no matter whether we travel east or west. Yeah, and that things are contained within that, like an egg, if you like. But
like barrier off.
Yeah, like it's possibly like got some sort of enclosement, because as I might have said, thermodynamics demands that there's an enclosure. Otherwise, we'd have no pressure here. It would be all sucked off into the vacuum of somewhere else. It couldn't be here unless it was contained somehow. So I suggest that it was always intended to be like this, and that as you descend lower beyond this plane of Earth, you get into the lower chakras, and the Earth becomes heavier and denser. So we've never been able to drill more than 8 miles into the Earth. We don't know what's below us, and then as we go higher, things become more ethereal. So as we ascend, as we see on the DMT, perhaps we become more like these light beings, energy beings, and we just become eventually a part of the ether. And so things are lighter higher up, heavier down, and this is just the balance of where water sits and where we kind of reside and are comfortable. We know that if we went into the high mountains, we'd become sick because the environment is not quite right for us. And obviously we can't go any lower because it's, as I say, it's too thick and
So
wet.
if we're not a globe, then why do we see a globe in the sky?
Well, I get asked that question quite a lot.
Is that put there? If that's put
Yeah.
there, then are we not put here, which
Yeah.
would then debunk all of the ideas about spirituality?
Well, no, I mean we okay. So in the Bible, the Bible talks about, and all the cultures talk about the sun and the moon are energy centers that are given to us to give us night, day, to give us our nature, our spring, our so on. Feminine energy, the moon, and the masculine energy, the sun, absolutely. And it's all electromagnetic. So when I look at the sun now, and I do sun gazing early morning and stuff, or I look at the moon, all I see is a disk. The rotundity that my mind used to apply to it, because I'd been programmed to see a ball, I accept that seems to have melted away from me. So all I see when I stare at it is a round thing in the sky. That's my best observation. And even with a camera with some sort of sun filter on, what you see is a round thing. It appears to me to be rolling like this in the sky. Particularly when you look at the moon at a new moon, you will see, full moon. You will see the moon roll like this through the course of the night. If you can watch it for 6 or 8 hours best, you will see. Pick a spot that's recognizable on the moon and watch it turn like the hand face of a clock, about half the speed of the hand face of a clock. I found this out 3 years ago. I've been observing it for 3 years. Just the last few nights, particularly, I've been watching it again because we've just come through the full moon. So that's something they never teach us about. So what are the moon? I just say that they're round things and lights, perhaps your energy centers. They're not balls, and if they were balls, they'd be balls that were lighter than air because they have to be able to be up there. They have to be held up there. They have to be, so as an electromagnetic force, I think it works better than saying it's a physical object. And I think we decode the moon and sun ourselves, which is why at the full moon, you'll notice that the clouds just above you are bright, but the clouds 10 miles away, 5 miles away, are not catching the moonlight at all from your perspective. But someone who's 10 miles away would say, no, the moon's lighting up the clouds just near me, but not back where you are. Same as with the sunlight at night, where it comes at the beach to your feet, but to your mate who's 20 meters down there, he can't see the light coming to your feet, but it's coming to his. So I think that we're encoding this light for ourselves. I say that the stars are bright lights twinkling in the stars. We think that there are some sort of cymatics, like it's a sound in water effect, where you create a vibration. And if you've ever seen, the cymatics where they take a speaker and put the sand and it creates those fractal shapes, well, that's what guys are picking up with their P900 cameras. The 80 times, 100 times zoom cameras. They slow the footage down, and you just get these patterns, repeating patterns, which is why they say, it's Mars going round or the moons of Saturn and all that sort of thing. But it's just some kind of light show that we can see in the sky. That's all we're seeing. We could hypothesize deeper, and they've done an experiment called the star in a jar, where they can fire a frequency at water and get a star to erupt, and that's on YouTube, called Star in a Jar. Just Google that. So there are theories based on some things that we can test for ourselves about maybe what's going on in the way that the sun works, and the way that the daylight works, and what the moon might be.
Interesting.
Good. Well,
I've never really got into